Denise was known because of her comic ability and talent as an actor, but she was also known for being fiercely punctual. So when she didn't arrive to perform in the evening's theatre show and hadn't been in touch with anyone, her friends and colleagues began to worry. Patrol officers from the Montreal Urban Community Police Department turned up to the address given by her flatmate and made their way into the building. The door was unlocked and slightly ajar. They made their presence known and entered the apartment to assess the situation. What they found was chilling. This is Red Rum, a podcast focusing on the true victims of crime. Denise Morel. Yvonne Gertrude Denise Morel was born on the 3rd of December 1926 in Montreal, Quebec. She grew up in a working-class household with her brothers Roger, Gilbert and Gaston, and her sisters Huguette and Pierrette. Yvonne grew up in the Hochelaga Maisonneuve neighbourhood in Montreal. It's situated on the eastern half of the island. At the time of Yvonne's childhood, the neighbourhood was facing debt and unemployment, meaning that the family of 8 regularly struggled for money. Just 2 months after Yvonne was born, there was a huge fire at the Laurier Palace movie theatre, caused by a discarded cigarette. The disaster was an event that shaped Yvonne's life, as it affected the artistic community heavily for many years to come. 78 people, most of them children, were killed in the fire, and many people used this to forbid children from going to the cinema. They claimed that the cinema, quote, ruins the health of children, weakens their lungs, troubles their imagination, excites their nervous system, harms their education, overexcites their sinful ideas, and leads to immorality. From an early age, Yvonne enjoyed dancing and singing with her siblings, and she had a real knack for comedy. But a law was passed after the fire, forbidding anyone under the age of 16 from being able to attend cinema screenings. So she turned her focus from film towards the stage. The next few years were focused on Yvonne's studies, and with her parents' say-so, she made the decision to change her name to Denise Morel. Throughout the 1930s, other forms of entertainment such as radio and TV began to initiate, and in 1931, Canada's first TV station began broadcasting in Montreal. The production was happening on Denise's doorstep, and she was keen to be involved. Her father was incredibly supportive and told Denise that he would help her in any way he could, but TV was really new, as was film. So he encouraged her to think about taking the step from performing for family and friends to actually studying theatre. Denise impressed her acting teachers through the range she was able to deliver. She came across as an open and kind woman, and her acting style was no different. Denise impressed fellow actors with her voice, speaking in a warm, grounded tone for much of her scripted work. One afternoon, she surprised everyone in class when she effortlessly transformed into a clown-like, high-pitched, silly character, unlike anything her classmates had seen from her. In 1958, Denise made her professional debut at Théâtre des Pierres, which led to her becoming a regular on Montreal stages. Throughout her life in the spotlight, Denise kept her private life very private. She found the fame that came with being one of the first successful female actors in Montreal quite overwhelming. Even so, she enjoyed meeting new people and was continuously proud of the work she was creating, both in theatre and on screen. Denise lived in the Plateau Montreal borough in Montreal. It was home to wonky pastel-coloured terraced buildings and a number of underground theatre spaces. The famous Park Avenue, situated in the heart of the borough, was full of independent bakeries and shops. Her film and theatre work continued over the next few years. It was around this time Denise had decided that she probably needed to move apartments. She was living with a friend, but at the age of 54, craved her own space. As well as this, the early signs of gentrification of the Plateau Montreal borough were starting to become apparent, and as rents increased, she made the decision to look for a new place to live. On July the 17th, 1984, Denise decided to take a look at a listing of a ground floor apartment on Sanguinet Street, just the next part of town over from where she was currently living. It wasn't a perfect area, but it would be a step away from the bustling streets of Plateau Montreal and a little closer to the calming St. Lawrence River. Denise had a show to perform in that evening, so asked the landlord if they could meet in the afternoon. But the landlord told her that he wouldn't be able to make it before her evening call time. He said that he would leave the apartment unlocked and she could take a look herself. He told her that he would call her on the home telephone the following day to see if it was appropriate for her. She asked if it would be okay to leave it unlocked, and he assured her it was empty of furniture and valuables, so it would be no problem. At 2:30 p.m, Denise made her way to the apartment, stopping at the bank on the way. She made a withdrawal of $200 before making the 15-minute walk to the apartment she was going to be viewing. At 6:30 that evening, Denise's co-star, Renee Gagnon, began to worry when she didn't turn up to their pre-arranged meeting. Assuming that she may have had a change of plans and decided to meet at the theatre, Renee headed towards the theatre. However, as 7 p.m. came and went, and with no sign of Denise, he alerted the director and management. Denise was known for being punctual, and it was unlike her not to let anyone know. Denise's friend and actor, Louise, took on Denise's role temporarily for the evening's performance. However, once the show had finished and there was still no sign of Denise, or any kind of message from her, her friends and colleagues began to worry. Renee said, quote, "When Denise said something, she always did it. Her reputation was spotless. When I arrived at the theatre and no one knew where she was, I was in any case convinced that something very serious had happened." The management alerted the police and called round all Montreal hospitals to see if she was there. The stage manager then contacted Denise's flatmate to see if she was there, but Denise hadn't told anyone where she was going, and the stage manager was informed that she hadn't been home since the previous morning. Soon after that phone call, the owner of the apartment that Denise had gone to view called Denise's apartment and her friend answered. He wanted to know if she was interested. As soon as Denise's flatmate realised that was the last place she must have been, she called the police, who made their way to the apartment to investigate. At around 4 p.m. on the 18th of July, patrol officers from the Montreal Urban Community Police Department turned up to the address given by her flatmate. The door was unlocked and slightly ajar. They quickly made their way in to assess the situation, and what they found was chilling. Denise's body was lying on the floor, covered in blood. She had been beaten so savagely that her nose, jaw, and skull were shattered. Denise had also been raped, and a sample of semen was recovered from her body. It was later revealed that the killer had heated up the iron bar on the gas stove before beating her and then strangling her to death with a rope. At the scene, there was a matchbox, a piece of rope, an iron bar, and a blood-stained footprint. When Denise was found, her trousers that were soaked with blood had been ripped off and the zip was broken. Her blouse, trousers, and underwear were covered in blood and semen, so were kept as evidence in hope of advances in DNA technology. The tragedy was too much for Denise's siblings to deal with. Her nephew, Elaine, agreed to accompany officers to the morgue to identify her body. Officers carried Denise's body, wrapped in a bright orange body bag, out of the flat, where a large number of reporters were waiting to hear who the victim was and what had happened. The pathologist found the cause of death to be severe trauma to the skull and brain by violent impacts to the head and face with a blunt object, as well as severe trauma to the neck. Denise suffered deep bruises and abrasions to the eyelids, lips, and chin, a lower tooth fracture, a dislocated left finger, and bruises on the back of both hands. She also suffered lacerations to the scalp and multiple fractures of the skull and nose. The press, the community of Plateau Montreal Borough, and most of Canada were urgently awaiting news of the killer. Even though there was solid DNA evidence, the first conviction based on DNA evidence wasn't achieved until 1987. Colin Pitchfork was convicted of the rape and murders of 15-year-olds Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth, with the use of DNA from semen found on both of the girls' bodies. Colin Pitchfork is a well-known name amongst some crowds. Infamous for being the first criminal to be convicted of murder based on DNA evidence. Linda Mann was just 15 years old when she made the familiar journey to her friend's house, but when she didn't arrive, police were called and eventually found her body lying to the side of a footpath. Linda had been raped and strangled, and although a semen sample was collected from her body, the case eventually went cold. A few years later, in July of 1986, Dawn Ashworth, who was also 15, went missing whilst walking home. Her body was found in the woods near her house 2 days later. She had been raped, beaten, and strangled. A semen sample was taken from her body. In the year leading up to Dawn's death, a new forensic technique had been developed. It allowed comparison and potential matches to be made from DNA samples. On the 19th of September 1987, Colin Pitchfork was arrested and his DNA was found to match the semen samples found on both victims. Colin admitted to the rape and murder of the two girls, for which he was sentenced to life imprisonment. In 2018, he was denied parole. Six days after her death, Denise's funeral was held at St. Clement's Roman Catholic Church in Montreal's East End, where over 1,000 family, friends and fans gathered to mourn for her. In 1990, the city of Montreal honoured the much-loved actor's memory by naming a park after her. Even now, long green ivy covers the right wall of the park, with an idyllic set of trees that lead to a winding path. There's a play area that sits to the left, and yet again more trees. A light brown wooden picket fence surrounds the park, and a few old-style French lampposts shine warmly on the park and surrounding paths. Just to the right of the entrance, there's a white and red sign that says on it, Denise Montreal. Investigators penned 3 theories as to what might have happened to Denise on that fateful night. The first being that the suspect saw Denise withdraw the $200 from the bank and then followed her to the empty apartment, where they robbed her before raping and murdering her. Another theory came from some solid eyewitness testimony when a delivery boy from a nearby restaurant saw a suspicious man whose clothes were stained with blood. He said that he saw the man sometime between 4:30 p.m. and 5:30 p.m, which fit the timeline of the murder. It's thought that the murderer may have stumbled upon the empty apartment when looking for a place to do drugs. The final theory was that Denise may have known her attacker. A day before the murder, a potential lodger went to view the apartment, but left before the end of the visit because she said it didn't feel safe. Denise was known to be quite fearful and not to venture out unnecessarily, so it's likely that she would have been accompanied by someone she knew or trusted. Even with all of these theories, the case gained no new leads and eventually went cold, with thousands of mourners unable to gain closure or feel safe in the city. Over the next 23 years, Denise's murder remained unsolved, but still the focus of many conversations. And in April 2007, a French-language TV network produced a documentary on the case with the aim of raising the profile and finding new leads. The Montreal Police Department set up a tip line for any new leads and began working again on the 23-year-old cold case. In August 2007, a huge breakthrough came when the cold case detectives were able to match the DNA samples from the semen found on Denise's body to a rape case that occurred in 2006. The individual convicted for the 2006 rape case was Gaetan Bissonnette, a 49-year-old white man from Montreal. Gaetan's criminal record, which started in 1976, consisted of 19 convictions for offences ranging from rape to theft. Gaetan admitted that Denise had only been targeted as a matter of chance. He was squatting in the unlocked apartment after looking for somewhere to do drugs when Denise had come to view it as a place to rent. He admitted that she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time and that it was a pure coincidence. At the time of the murder, Montreal had seen a steep social and economic decline. Mass homelessness emerged around this time because there were government cutbacks to social housing programs, and it was common for many homeless people to squat in abandoned or unlocked houses. Single adult men were and still are most likely to be homeless in Canada. Just 2 months after Denise's murder, Gaetan broke into another woman's apartment where he raped her at knife point for 7 hours. He was convicted and served just 3 years for the rape. The solid DNA evidence was used to convict Gaetan. However, the charge was changed from originally being premeditated murder to second-degree murder in exchange for a plea deal. Gaetan pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in order to avoid the trial. In Montreal, second-degree murder carries a mandatory life sentence with the possibility of parole. The Crown Court agreed with Gaetan's lawyer that he would be sentenced to a life sentence with no eligibility of parole for at least 14 years. However, after just 20 minutes of consideration, Justice James Brunton overturned the joint sentencing suggestion. He said that it was insufficient and, quote, not harsh enough given the seriousness of the crime. He explained that although Gaetan pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of unpremeditated murder, the crime committed was one more akin to premeditated murder, because Denise was killed in a context of particularly brutal sexual assault. The judge also spoke of Gaetan's long judicial past and recognised that he'd made no attempt to be treated for his problem of violence. Justice James Brunton later sentenced Gaetan to a life sentence with a minimum of 20 years before the possibility of parole. Gaetan didn't appeal and will be eligible for parole in 2027 at the age of 70. There was some discussion over his release from prison for the previous rape offence. Many people thought that his sentence of 3 years was too short, and that a longer sentence could have prevented further crimes. Denise's brother, Gaston, fought for over 20 years to gain justice for his sister's death. He, along with 4 of her nieces and nephews, were at the courthouse to see the verdict take place. They expressed that they believed justice had been served, and they were happy with the result. For a lot of people, Denise represented their childhood. She was a constant figure of energy and delight. Our childhood memories define who we are, and Denise helped shape that for many people. Denise's legacy lives on through her many family members, friends, and fans of the show. The rape that Gaetan committed was one of both anger and power. These titles are given to this attack and are a set of several types that clinical psychologists have defined and analysed. With, quote, power assertive rapes, the rapist uses the attack as a way to feed their issues of control, dominance, strength, intimidation, and authority. The rapist, and in this case Gaetan, probably used verbal threats, as well as the metal bar, to make Denise comply. With this kind of rape, the rapist tends to have fantasies about sexual conquests and rape, sometimes believing that the victim will enjoy it. This is, of course, untrue, and so the rapist's fantasy is never satisfied. And as Gaetan did, they go on to rape again, continuously searching for a victim until they find the right one. With, quote, anger rape, the rapist aims to humiliate and degrade the victim. This kind of rape is usually much more physical and forceful than would be necessary if the intent were to solely achieve penetration. The kinds of physical force that are listed here and that Gaetan might have used include grabbing, striking, knocking the victim to the ground, beating, or tearing their clothes. There is a fairly limited amount of data available on sexually violent men for a number of reasons, but we do know that risk factors of a man committing rape include attitudes and beliefs, as well as behaviour arising from situations and social conditions that provide opportunities and support for abuse, and alcohol and drug consumption. Gaetan was high on drugs when he committed the murder, and he was homeless. We don't know that any amount of support could have prevented him from killing Denise, but we do know that that support wasn't available, and those exact conditions increase risk factors. We also know that even once Gaetan was tried and convicted for attacks, burglaries, and rapes in the years before and after Denise's murder, His sentencing did not reflect his potential as a violent criminal. And as the judge said when sentencing him for Denise's murder, that he recognised that Gaetan made no attempt to be treated for his problem of violence. In 2027, Gaetan will be able to apply for parole, which could lead to a deadly outcome given his previous behaviours. In Rochester, New York, in the 1980s, Arthur Shawcross had served 14 years as part of a plea deal and good behaviour for killing a young boy and girl. After his release, he went on to kill at least 12 more people and earned his name as the Genesee River Killer. And this, unfortunately, reflects much of the challenge faced in the justice system today. There's no right answer about how to prevent this, but there is little investment and priority in prevention methods and dismantling toxic thought patterns that may lead to these behaviours, and ultimately, murder. If Gaetan is granted parole without root treatment, observation, and continued support, there is a high probability he will offend again.